Leading off our discussion now, John Heilemann, national affairs analyst for NBC News and MSNBC and co-host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus. Also joining us is Ambassador Wendy Sherman, former Undersecretary of State. She was the United States lead negotiator for the Iran nuclear deal and is now an MSNBC global affairs contributor. And Ambassador Sherman, I want to start with you on this Trump nuclear threat, it sounds like, to Iran. I'm not taking it seriously, and I'm not taking it seriously based on the North Korean experience with the president and the 5 months he took us through of threatening North Korea before completely reversing course completely and trying to make best friends with Kim Jong-un. How do you read what the president said about Iran?
Well, I certainly think it was a distraction and deflection in the way that you described it. And somehow I think I ought to speak in all caps as if I will be heard louder. But I think we all know that when you're talking about serious things, a quieter voice makes a lot more sense. Indeed, I think that the president is trying to goad Iran into a conflict. Secretary Pompeo gave a speech in California at the Reagan Library and really pushed hard, saying we're for the Iranian people and your government is corrupt and they're all hardliners and they're not going to give you a break, but we can. And he said that at the same time and invoked Ronald Reagan's call for freedom in his 1982 Westminster speech. He did that the couple of days before President Trump said he was going to take security clearances away from people who were speaking up and speaking their minds. So we're not exactly a beacon for freedom that Secretary Pompeo put out there. And we have a president that has a playbook for Iran and a playbook for North Korea, but no strategy to get an outcome that ensures the safety and security of America.
John, I want to read you what Tony Schwartz said about the Trump tweet. And Tony Schwartz, of course, the author, I was going to say co-author, but he's the real author of The Art of the Deal, the first Trump book.
I believe he wrote every word in the entire book, including the articles.
And really studied Donald Trump up close, got to know him. He said there was nothing strategic about Trump's schoolyard bully, all caps tweet about Iran. When he feels weak and vulnerable, he lashes out in an effort to recover his sense of self, which is so fragile and easily wounded.
I often scare people on television when I talk about Donald Trump, but dark and paranoid and ominous. I always think when he's tweeting about something, I shouldn't worry about it very much because it's mostly when he's tweeting about it, it's gibberish most of the time, right? And it is just deflection and projection and incoherent rambling. The stuff he doesn't tweet about is the stuff he cares about. What doesn't he tweet about? Doesn't tweet about Playboy models. Doesn't tweet about Michael Avenatti. Doesn't tweet about Stormy Daniels. Doesn't tweet very much about the people who he's trying to take their security clearances away. Every once in a while he does that, but then he tries to do something like he did today. But the stuff that scares him, the stuff that worries him, I'll tell you what else he doesn't tweet about. Doesn't tweet about Paul Manafort very often, right? The people who are a genuine threat to Trump, the people who are, as you said before, there's been a lot of panic over the last 18 months. We've seen flashes of it. But right now, you really feel the walls closing in. And I always think that when he's tweeting about Iran, it's dangerous, and so it concerns me. But I don't take a word of it seriously because it is really just the ultimate, look at the squirrel.
And Ambassador Sherman, it couldn't be more strange that the place we look for encouragement, the encouraging side of what Donald Trump's tweet threatening a nuclear attack is that the encouraging side of it is, oh, don't worry, the president doesn't mean a word he says. Like that's where we go for comfort.
Indeed, you know, we saw the fire and fury around North Korea, and we saw this pomp and circumstance instead of a persistence and precision. Now we're seeing, you know, the schoolboy speaking loudly and showing off how strong and powerful he is, when in fact all we're seeing is weakness and insecurity. Iran sees this. This is a culture that believes you either resist or you surrender, and they are not going to surrender one iota to Donald Trump. They understand what the game is here. Look, I'm all for standing up for the human rights of the Iranian people, and I quite agree that all of the leaders in Iran, even those that we call moderate, are hardliners. But the way to help the Iranian people was the Iran deal. That helped the people of Iran by lifting sanctions, and it ensured our security and the world's security by ensuring there wouldn't be a nuclear weapon. I have no idea what President Trump thinks he's going to do. A tweet is not going to get him a quote-unquote better deal.
And John, new NBC Wall Street Journal poll shows that the president's approval rating is far below majority, but 88% of Republicans say they support the president. Right. And unfortunately, in most of the media, they never do the math on what that actually means, since only 26% of voters are Republicans.
Here we go.
88% of 26% is something like 23% of voters support Donald Trump.
Republican Party is shrinking, and man, you talked about getting abused by Fox News. I'm going to get abused for saying that. The Republican Party is shrinking. The Republican coalition
That's just
is shrinking.
A numerical fact.
It's just a numerical fact, right? So we spend, and this will be the third time today I've said this, we spend a lot of time focused on the Trump voter. We spend a lot of time focused on Trump's base. I don't think it's wrong that we focus on it, because it is the way. If you try to understand what Trump's doing, shoring up that base, it explains a lot of his tactical maneuvers. It explains his long-term plan to try to survive the onslaught that he's facing right now on a variety of legal fronts. But in the end, the country's not with Donald Trump.
Right.
And we normally, and in every election I've ever covered, going back to 1988, we focus on independent voters, moderate voters, swing voters. We focus on all kinds of voters who make the difference in elections. Now we don't talk about that anymore. All we talk about is the Trump base, the Trump voter, how the Republicans in this shrinking Republican coalition are with him. Instead of focusing on the fact that the ABC News poll today said 75% of the American people are against him attacking the intelligence agencies. 2/3 of the American people are against or disapprove of how he handled the Helsinki summit. The vast majority of America is against Trump on these major issues. And again, I think we have to focus on his supporters because it's so important to what he's doing in the White House. But we also have to focus on the bigger picture, which is that the country on the important issues, and this is huge political salience for these midterms and for his reelection if he gets that far, the vast majority of the country is not with him.
And Ambassador Sherman, I just wanted to get your reaction more fully to this announcement by the White House today that not only are they thinking about taking away John Brennan's security clearance, basically former FBI Director Comey, James Clapper, Hayden Rice McCabe as Sanders. So a cross-section of former Trump administration officials. And I'm sorry to say you're not on the list. You didn't make that particular honor roll. But this is an unprecedented position by the White House. What's your reaction to that? It's
unprecedented and it's absurd. And quite frankly, I and many other people could be on that list. Many of us have security clearances. When I left the administration, I went on the President's Intelligence Advisory Board and kept my clearances. Then when that term ended, the intelligence community wanted me to keep my clearances because they wanted me to debrief them on the negotiations and on how we try to get Americans who are held hostage out of countries. They wanted information. If you have security clearances, it doesn't mean you get to read everything and know everything. It's on as a need-to-know basis. So I haven't been back to the intelligence agencies in some time now, don't have a right to do that, but I still have my clearances. I would take it as an honor to be on that list. It is absurd. It is ridiculous. These are patriots who are standing up for the freedom that Secretary Pompeo talked about the other night.
It's worse than that, though. It's not just absurd and ridiculous. It is dangerous, and it is of a piece with the way the president talks about withdrawing broadcast networks' licenses, pulling credentials of journalists who ask him questions he doesn't like. This is the beginning of a step of how the president is trying to exercise actual power to try to silence people whose criticism threatens him. And I think it's not, we shouldn't set our hair on fire about it, but we should look at it and say, this is an early warning sign of where this could go pretty quick.
Quite agree.
We're going to have to take a break here. Ambassador Wendy Sherman and John Heilemann, thank you for starting us off tonight. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.